The first thing I noticed that morning wasn't the cattle moving in the pasture. It wasn't the steam rising off my coffee cup either. It was a bright yellow arrow sign planted out by the county road, pointing straight at my locked ranch gate, as if my land had suddenly been turned into a tourist attraction. At first, I thought it was some prank. Maybe kids had stolen a sign from a garage sale and stuck it out there, but then my phone buzzed. I glanced down and saw an email with a subject line that made my hands tremble. Reservation confirmed, 150 guests. For a moment, I actually thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I don't rent out my ranch. I don't host weddings, tours, or parties. This place is cattle, fences, and quiet mornings. Yet, here was a digital receipt, an official-looking confirmation, saying my ranch had been booked like it was some kind of event venue. The email even listed the date, time, and expected head count. 150 real estate agents. Tomorrow. At my gate. My stomach tightened. I stepped out onto the porch, the boards creaking under my boots, and squinted toward the road. That's when I realized there wasn't just one arrow, there were several. A whole breadcrumb trail of neon yellow signs leading cars directly to my property. Each one read, in bold black letters, Realtor Caravan, 150. My coffee didn't taste right anymore, bitter, like something had gone sour in the middle of my morning. I set the mug down on the porch railing and walked toward the gate. That's when I spotted movement, a car slowing down, tires crunching gravel, the driver leaning forward to peer at the arrow signs. They pulled over right across from my property like they belonged there. The woman inside the car was dressed in business clothes, a phone in her hand. She kept glancing between the GPS map on her screen and my locked gate, her brow furrowed as if she were solving some puzzle. After a moment, she rolled down the window and called out, "Excuse me, is this the check-in spot for the caravan? My app says I'm supposed to be here." I walked closer, shaking my head. "Ma'am, this is private property. This ranch isn't hosting any event." She blinked at me like I'd just told her the sky was green. "But the GPS pin says..." She held her phone up. Sure enough, the digital map showed a bright red dot, smack on my gate coordinates. My gate. Not the HOA clubhouse where they usually hold their events. Not some community park. No, right here, at the entrance to my land. I asked her who told her this was the location. She scrolled and pulled up the same email I'd just received, forwarded through her real estate office. She looked genuinely embarrassed, mumbling an apology before backing her car away to wait on the roadside until she could reach the event organizers. But her confusion told me something important. This wasn't a one-off mistake. This was planned, programmed, distributed. I turned back toward my house, and that's when I saw my neighbor, Rick Miller, heading over from next door. He had his phone out, snapping pictures of the signs with a puzzled grin on his face. "Jake," he called, pointing toward the road, "you planning on hosting a party today?" I shook my head, holding up my own phone. "First I've heard of it, Rick." He raised his eyebrows and gave a low whistle. "Well, somebody sure thinks you are. You'd better document this. I've got a feeling it's just getting started." Rick was right. By the time I stepped back into my kitchen, my phone buzzed again. Another notification. The event app, the one tied into the email, now showed a scheduled check-in time at my gate, 2:30 tomorrow afternoon. Bold as brass, no question about it. I set my mug down on the counter. The porcelain rattled against the wood, not from nerves, but from the sheer audacity of it all. Somebody had drawn a digital bullseye on my front gate and told 150 strangers to come knocking. And as I stood there, looking out my kitchen window at those bright yellow arrows fluttering in the breeze, I realized something. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was the beginning of a nightmare, or maybe the beginning of a fight. Either way, my ranch had just been turned into someone else's stage, and I hadn't even been asked. Rick leaned against my fence post, still snapping photos with that old iPhone of his. The yellow arrows danced in the breeze like mocking flags. He shook his head and muttered, "I've seen some HOA nonsense in my time, Jake, but this takes the cake." He was right. This wasn't just a bad idea. It was organized. Signs printed, planted, lined up like runway lights. GPS coordinates programmed into people's phones. And now strangers were arriving at my gate, expecting to be welcomed in like paying guests. I pulled my own phone out, started taking pictures from every angle, each arrow, each email screen, even the woman in the business suit still sitting out on the public road, frowning at her phone. "Documentation," Rick said with a half smile. Can't argue with the lens. The truth is, he was smarter than he looked in those worn jeans and boots. I've learned over the years that the first thing you do when someone tries to walk over you is collect proof. Words can get twisted, memories fade, but a picture of a county road lined with arrows pointing straight to my locked gate, that tells the story all by itself. I headed back inside, grabbed a piece of poster board I kept in the pantry for ranch signs, and scrawled a message in thick black marker. No event without owner's written permission. The ink bled through the paper as I pressed hard, anger sharpening each letter. Then I marched back to the gate and tied it to the metal bars with baling wire, making sure it faced the road for every passing car, and every camera phone, to see. Rick let out a satisfied grunt. That'll make your position crystal clear. Not that they'll care, I muttered, but it'll matter when the deputy shows up. Because I wasn't waiting for this circus to unfold on its own, I pulled up the non-emergency number for the county sheriff's office and made the call. The dispatcher answered with a calm, clipped tone. I explained what was happening: unauthorized signs on the public right-of-way, an email claiming my property had been reserved without my knowledge, a caravan of realtors already beginning to arrive. Potential trespassing situation, I told her, maybe worse. She didn't sound surprised. Maybe she had heard stranger calls before, but she took down all the details, asked me to forward the photos and emails, and promised a deputy would be in the area that morning. I thanked her, hung up, and felt the first ripple of relief in my chest. At least the law was now looped in. Rick gave me a look. So, what's the game plan? Document everything, I said. Keep the gate locked, and wait for the county to see what kind of mess this really is. He chuckled and shook his head. You're gonna need more coffee. Inside, I poured myself another cup, the bitter taste still lingering from earlier. I sat at the kitchen table and scrolled through the email again. The sender's name glared back at me: Karen Ellison, president of the HOA next door. The same woman who thought her neighborhood rules gave her power over land she didn't own. The email was short, businesslike, and full of assumption. She called it a reservation. She talked about community showcase access, as if those words were magic keys that unlocked private gates. She even mentioned the subdivision's CCNRs, covenants, conditions, restrictions, as if their little rulebook had any legal standing on my property. It was like somebody claiming their neighborhood bylaws gave them VIP rights to your living room couch. My jaw tightened as I read it again. It wasn't just arrogance. It was presumption, dressed up in official language. From the window I saw another car slowing near the gate, the driver craning his neck toward the sign I'd just posted. He frowned, picked up his phone, and started dialing. A moment later, I spotted a second car pulling over behind him, and then a third. The arrows had done their job. The red dot on the GPS was pulling people in like moths to a porch light. I lifted my cup, stared at the steam rising. This is only the beginning, I whispered to myself. Out on the road, the first realtor climbed out of her car, shading her eyes against the morning sun, and started walking toward the locked gate. The nightmare was already unfolding, one confused visitor at a time. By late morning, the shoulder of the county road looked less like open country and more like the lobby of a busy hotel, if a hotel lobby had dust devils and bawling cabs in the background. A pop-up tent appeared first, its fabric snapping in the breeze. Then a folding table, then neat rows of orange traffic cones that tried and failed to make the gravel look official. Someone unfurled a vinyl banner that read, Realtor Caravan, 150, in cheerful letters, the kind of cheerful that makes your jaw clench. I stood at my gate with the sign I'd wired up, no event without owner's written permission, and watched the production bloom across the right-of-way as if the county had suddenly leased my frontage to a circus. Cars kept arriving in twos and threes, easing in, noses pointed toward the arrows that lined the ditch like runway lights. Doors opened, heels clicked on asphalt, voices rose and fell, chipper, professional, a little impatient. Check in, someone called toward the tent. 2:30 tomorrow, another answered, consulting a clipboard. But the app says we can pre-stage here today. Pre-stage. That word landed like a spur against bone. Rick drifted to my side, camera already working. You see they're using the shoulder like a waiting room, he said. It's a lobby without a building. Lobby or not, I said quietly, it isn't permitted. A white pickup rolled up and parked half on, half off the gravel. A man hopped out wearing a reflective vest and a tool belt that clanked like an argument. Brandon Cho, the contractor whose company offered access assurance for events. He moved with the brisk confidence of a man who expected to be waved through. When he reached the gate, he gave my lock a casual, professional look, the way a dentist glances at molars he's about to drill. "Morning," he said. "We're here to make sure the gate can handle event traffic." "Event traffic?" I repeated. "On private property." He tapped his clipboard, unfazed. "Cleared by the HOA. We're installing temporary access controls and confirming load tolerance. Should be quick." I held out my palm. "Insurance certificate." He handed over a neatly laminated copy. I scanned the page, and my stomach did that slow, steady drop you feel when a bridge starts to sway in the wind. The policy listed a location that sounded close to my place, but not exactly it. Community Ranch Access Point, as if naming a thing politely made it real. The third line was the one that mattered. Additional insured, a blank stripe of paper where my name should have been. "Mr. Cho," I said, keeping my voice even for the growing audience of phones pointed in our direction, "this certificate doesn't cover my property or me." He reached for it, then stopped. Professionals can feel liability like cattle feel a storm. "We were told this address was authorized," he said carefully. "By whom?" "HOA Event Management." He hesitated, then added, "Their president." "Karen Ellison," I said. He gave the tiniest nod, eyes flicking to my sign. Across the road, a woman in a navy suit called, "Is this going to take long? We have a schedule." A second later, I heard the soft rattle of a phone going live. Rick stepped closer. "Mind if I photograph your COI?" he asked. "For our records." Brandon let him, which told me he had already started talking himself backward in his head. "Look," Brandon said, lowering his voice, "I'm just here to do the prep. If the insurance isn't right, I can call dispatch." "That'd be wise," I said, "before somebody decides to start cutting things they don't own." He tried on a quick smile that didn't fit, then retreated toward his truck to make the call. Meanwhile, the makeshift check-in table had drawn a small cluster of agents. One passed out lanyards and glossy maps. Another practiced her greeting voice. "Welcome, we're so glad you came." She trailed off when she noticed my sign. "Is that new?" she asked her colleague. "It's a misunderstanding," the colleague said brightly, like someone smoothing a tablecloth over a stain. "We have authorization." "From whom?" I asked, not bothering to raise my voice. The wind carried the words for me. Silence, then a flurry of glances at phones. The yellow arrow nearest my gate wobbled on its stake, nodding as if it agreed with me. Funny thing about arrows, they point, but they don't decide. People do. I rested my hand on the top rail and studied the growing scene. The more official it looked, clipboards, cones, a banner flapping like an invitation, the more dangerous it became. Not because anyone there wanted harm, most of them were just doing what an app told them to do. The danger was the story they were telling themselves. This is already arranged. That story makes reasonable people unreasonable faster than whiskey on an empty stomach. A sedan eased up to the line of cars and stopped, blocking half the lane. The driver, a man in a blazer too hot for the day, leaned out his window and shouted, "Hey, can we get the gate open for a quick recon? We paid for access." Rick didn't miss a beat. "You paid someone?" he called back. "You didn't pay the owner." A ripple of laughter moved through the cluster near the table, half nervous, half mean. Laughter is easy when you think you're in the right. I took a breath and stepped forward so they could all see me plainly, and, more importantly, hear me clearly over the rustle of the tent. "Folks," I said, "this is private property. No one has my written permission. There are no permits for structures on the right-of-way. You can wait on the public road, but you will not enter this ranch." Phones rose higher. Somewhere to my left, a video title was spoken aloud for the algorithm. "HOA reserves private ranch. Owner says no." Brandon returned, the phone still warm in his hand. His face had shifted, less sure, more cautious. "My dispatcher says we pause until we have the correct insurance endorsement and written owner authorization," he said. "I'm instructed not to proceed." The navy suit woman made a frustrated sound. "We were promised." "Promises aren't paperwork," I said. She rolled her eyes and turned away, broadcasting a sigh to her audience online. Rick leaned close enough for only me to hear. "Lobby's getting crowded. Crowded lobbies have fire codes," I murmured. Crowded road shoulders have deputies. As if summoned by the thought, a siren wailed far off, then died to a polite whoop. Heads turned. Out beyond the string of arrows, a tan patrol SUV crested the hill and started down toward us, light bar winking in the clear noon sun. The pop-up tent flapped like a startled bird. Cones shivered in the wind. The banner flexed and then, as if reconsidering its tone, sagged an inch on one corner. I tightened the baling wire on my sign, the metal warm under my palm. This patch of dust and gravel wasn't a lobby. It was still a county shoulder in front of a private gate, and the law was about to say so out loud. Behind me, the cattle shifted, hooves thudding softly in the dry ground. They didn't care about schedules or apps or head counts. They cared that the gate stayed shut. So did I. The deputy's SUV rolled to a stop with the kind of authority only a county vehicle can bring. Dust curled up around the tires, drifting into the sunlight like smoke from a slow fire. The chatter at the roadside dimmed, as if everyone had suddenly remembered they were on somebody else's property line. The door opened, and out stepped Deputy Harris, a broad man with a sunburned neck and a habit of pausing before he spoke, which made every word land heavier. His Stetson shaded his eyes, but I could see them sweeping the scene. The cones, the tent, the banner, the line of parked cars, and finally, my sign on the gate. He took it all in like evidence before a jury. "Morning," he said, voice carrying across the road. "Whose property is this?" I raised my hand. "Mine, Jake Hollis, private ranch, no permission granted for any event." He nodded once, then turned toward the pop-up tent where a pair of realtors were shuffling papers like nervous schoolkids. "Permits?" he asked flatly. A woman in heels cleared her throat. We're told by the HOA that county approval was already on file." Deputy Harris didn't blink. "Do you have those permits on you?" She fumbled in her tote bag and produced a plastic sleeve. He flipped through the pages, lips tightening. "This is a work order, not a permit. And this," he tapped the certificate of insurance Rick had photographed earlier, "doesn't list the property owner as additional insured, which means if someone trips on Mr. Hollis's gravel, you're out of luck." Phones hovered higher, catching every syllable. Harris knew it. He didn't raise his voice, but he let the silence after his words stretch long enough for the crowd to taste it. I handed him the folder I'd been keeping close. Emails, photos, GPS screenshots. He flipped through quickly, then looked back at the gathering with something between disbelief and irritation. No permit applications were filed with the county. No consent on record from the property owner. Yet, here you are setting up tents on a road shoulder. Rick muttered, "Lobby's closed." One of the younger agents tried to salvage the mood. "But, Deputy, the app directed us here. The GPS pin says check-in is at this gate." Harris's gaze sharpened. "Pins don't grant permission. Property owners do." He snapped a picture of the orange cones with his county-issued phone. "And you're encroaching on public right-of-way without authorization. That's citation territory." The security guard near the banner shuffled uneasily, radio still in hand. "We were just told to set up staging, sir." "By whom?" Harris pressed. The guard hesitated. "The HOA president, Ms. Ellison." A ripple went through the group like wind through dry grass. Everyone knew the name, but nobody wanted to own it. I pointed at my sign again, the black letters plain against the white poster board. "I put it in writing this morning. No event without written owner permission. Doesn't get simpler than that." Harris studied the sign, then gave a short nod. "Clear enough for me." He turned back to the crowd, tone shifting from patient to official. "Here's what's going to happen. You will remove the cones, the table, and that banner from the county shoulder immediately. You will cease all attempts to access this ranch. If I return and see structures back on this right-of-way, citations will be issued on the spot." The woman in heels tried again. "But we have over 100 agents scheduled." "Not my problem," Harris cut in, voice still even. "The problem is you planned an event on land you don't own, without permits, and without insurance coverage. Fix your plan. Somewhere else." Murmurs rippled through the group. A few agents started folding chairs. The banner sagged lower, one corner popping free in the wind. The whole setup unraveled like a carnival shutting down before dark. Rick whispered, "That's one way to clear a lobby." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I had been holding. The deputy's calm presence was like a fence post driven straight into shifting ground. For the first time all morning, it felt like the line was holding. Still, as the crowd thinned, I caught sight of a black SUV idling farther back. Tinted windows,